Good evening, everyone. This is Dr. Philip Craver, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation of Saved by the Fibers. This is my first time giving a webinar on Viva Learning, so bear with me if there's any technical difficulties. I'm looking now at all the people over the world, and I see people here from Africa and Asia and Europe and Australia. We welcome everybody here, and I hope you guys learned something that you can add to your practice wherever you guys are. So we're going to talk about today about all the difficult situations we face in the anterior, especially with the short-term and long-term provisionalization. There are several options that we normally use to temporize, and we'll talk about those a little bit, but what I really want to talk about here is using fiber-reinforced composite and adhesive dentistry to support a provisional pontic. And it's really that simple. We're just going to basically stick a pontic and support fibers and call it a day, but it's a lot to it actually, so we'll go over that in more detail in a bit. Before we jump in, I'm really required to inform you that this webinar is sponsored by Dentapreg. They are one of the companies that manufactures these fibers. They're not the only company that manufactures the fibers. There are several others that have different formulas and handling characteristics, but I'm not really going to talk about that today. I'm really going to showcase the Dentapreg fibers. All right, so we'll jump right in. Let's see here. So I practice in Cape Coral, Florida. For those of you who don't know, it's right down there in southwest Florida, next to Fort Myers. And Fort Myers' claim to fame is that for the last decade or so, we've been pretty much the fastest growing, or top 3 fastest growing areas in the country. And we have a middle class retirement community, and we have lots of snowbirds with lots of old dentistry that come down here. If you don't know what a snowbird is someone who comes for half the year down where it's warm, and then half the year they go back up north. And so we have a lot of situations where we have to provisionalize people for a long period of time, stage things certain ways to accommodate for people's travel. In my practice, I practice with my father. I'm a general dentist, and my practice is very general, but I try to focus a lot on IV sedation, implants, oral surgery, lots of removable. We have an in-house denture lab that really helps us out with our removable. And we see a lot, just like you guys, of one-time emergency visits. And one such emergency visit is this 7-year-old patient that came in, and she was really upset because she obviously was missing her front tooth and it just broken off, and she wanted it fixed right away. And this is one of the difficult situations that we face sometimes, where you look around the mouth and you see a kind of a mouthful of things that need to be done. You can see there's poor oral hygiene. There's probably caries everywhere. But the patient's chief complaint is that they really want this tooth fixed. And we really try to address the patient's chief complaint, even if we kind of have to go out of order a little bit. And we told the patient that, we can try to fix you up here, get you back in for a comprehensive exam, and she agreed to that, but as long as we fixed her up today. So what we decided to do for her is we put a rubber dam on her. We prepared this tooth, number 26, a little bit, and number 24, and we bonded a tooth in place. A little closer up there. And I feel really confident that this is going to last, at least for the provisional, because what we did here is we reinforced it with Dentapreg fibers. And with this, I'm pretty confident that she's going to be able to go for a pretty long time in this state, as long as we follow up and make sure she's doing okay while we get everything else addressed. And if you look here, she came in a couple of weeks later and did actually have the rest of the mouth addressed and got a comprehensive exam. And it's looking pretty good. The gums healed up pretty well. And this is a pretty good provisional. If you start thinking of the other options, this is probably the best one she had with the limited space. And she's actually still wearing this today. So the problem with the non-restorable anterior tooth is a lot of times you have patients come in with high aesthetic demand. They want it done now. There's time constraints. There's a lot of times so many comprehensive needs that you kind of feel like you're getting ahead of yourself by just focusing on one area. And a lot of times you don't know what their periodontal status is, if you've even got teeth that are stable enough to handle these things. And, as a practice, you have to be conscious of the patient's chief complaint. When they come in, they're going to, demand that they have what they need come in, even if it's not what they think. You've had people come in who've got caries all over the place and they want whitening. You kind of have to address both very carefully. And this is problems we face. So Another problem we face is someone like this. You probably all have somebody in your life that presents like this in some shape or form. And this happens to be a really good friend of mine who gives me a phone call at 7 o'clock at night and tells me he's got a really bad toothache, the worst he's ever had. And he says underneath his nose, he's nauseous, he just feels terrible. And he happens to live 3.5 hours away in Orlando. And so I tell him, well, you can come down and see me. I could see you in the morning. He goes, well, I really need to be seen right now. Could you see me? And so as a good friend, I said, you know what, come on down. We'll take a look at you. So he comes down. I remember his brown tooth, so I figured that he probably was going to need endo at some point. And so I figured this was the time. And so when he comes in, I look, and we take a cone beam of him because I started to suspect something else was going on. And I see right away that he had a really, really, really big radiolucency up here. You can kind of see that up here. And what you can't see from this also is got a lingual fracture. And you see this big post, this big chamber that was filled. He probably had this tooth traumatized when he was in his adolescence. Big chamber was filled. And right down here is where the tooth had fractured. This tooth we deemed to be non-restorable. And in that case, we had to think about what we were going to do. And to be honest with you, when I first saw him, I really didn't know how I was going to proceed. He's a pretty young guy. He's in his mid-30s. He's just graduated from law school. He's starting to build his practice. He's very busy. And we really need to solve it in an aesthetic way, long-term way, because he's going to have a lot of procedure done here to get this tooth back in working shape. And so when we talk about, and in his case, he wanted to have an implant, by the way. So when we talk about implant provisionalization options, we really have three options. One is the flipper, which is a pretty good way of doing it. We'll talk about that in a second. The second way is an Essex retainer, which is kind of my go-to appliance when I need something quick and dirty. And the other option is an immediate load implant, putting it in place and right away loading it for a provisional. And to revisit each one a little bit more, the flipper, of course, everybody knows what that is. The pros are that they're easy to make and that they have acceptable aesthetics. They really do. You know, I've seen some really, really nice flippers, and I've seen some really terrible ones, but most of the part that patients, for aesthetics-wise, do pretty well with them. The cons, of course, is that it's removable. You have to take it in and out. It can put pressure on the implant site, and sometimes if it's going to put pressure, you need to have broad palatal coverage so that you don't put so much pressure on it. You take the pressure off it by spreading the load a little bit for more surface area, which patients then affects their speech and eating, and they really would prefer not to have something like a flipper, but sometimes that's their only option. We give them that option, and patients go with it. Your next option is an Essex retainer. The pros of that is that they're extremely easy to make, acceptable aesthetics, and patients are very familiar with Invisalign. And if you do it well enough, if you spend some time with it, you can actually help contour the papilla if you make it well enough, just like you could, some kind of implant provisionalization with an immediate, or even sometimes with some kind of pontic that you put in place. And you can use the patient's existing tooth so the teeth shade really matches real well. It's kind of a nice transition for the patient to have. Okay. The cons are, of course, that it's removable and it gets dingy over time. And sometimes if they're using this for more than 3 months, I find that they kind of wear through them a little bit, and you have to have sometimes more than one if you're going to be healing for more than 3 months. Of course, the immediate load implant, people love this. It's fixed. They have excellent aesthetics. It's a practice builder. Patients love leaving there with the tooth. They're very thankful. But of course, the major con is that you do increase the risk of failure a little bit. All my failures that I've had have been from what I believe have failed were due to pressure on the implant, mainly from either being immediately loaded or somehow having pressure put on them in a healing abutment. It takes a high level of skill to pull off a really nice provisional implant. I've seen some really disaster cases where things weren't fitting right, or they moved, or whatnot. And there's even, if the teeth next to them are mobile and they're biting on those teeth, and even though it's out of occlusion, sometimes just the vibration of the teeth next to them can transmit pressure down the implant and cause some problems. So you have to really be aware of what's happening. It takes a high level of skill. And also the patient's compliance with zero occlusion and impeccable oral hygiene to keep these things really clean throughout the healing process. And here's another interesting fact that you don't really hear in a lot of meetings, and I'm really thankful for Dr. Bach Lee for giving a presentation at one of the international dental meetings, implant meetings, where he talked about a study where they studied cone beam data, and that they found that only 30% of implants can be immediately placed with a lingual screw hole access, meaning that when you angle the implant in the bone in the correct position, if you do it immediately, there's a lot of times, 70% of the time, the screw axis is either going to come out the incisal or the facial. And if you're getting all your screw holes to come out the lingual axis, then you're probably placing the implant in a position that's maybe coming out the buccal plate or not in a very good position for the long-term success of the implant. Now, of course, the lingual screw hole or the incisal screw hole axis isn't the end of the world. You can patch it up, and but a lot of times it's hard to make it look that great with a facial screw hole. So let's go back to my buddy here, and looking at him, what are we going to do to provisionalize him? Because he really wants an implant. I really like to see him have an implant. He's a busy attorney. I don't think a flipper option is going to be very well. This tooth, when it comes out, is going to have to be grafted. We're not going to be able to place the implant immediately. It's going to be a problem, and I don't think he's going to be able to tolerate having a flipper, speaking and going to court and doing all the things he has to do for that long, wearing something like that. In Essex, the problem with his case is that he does have a diastema in the middle here, as you can see, and as you know, when you make the Essex, it really kind of doesn't look that great when they're diastemas because the plastic material, the light doesn't shine through it very well, and it does kind of look ridiculous. And we already ruled out immediate load implant for this case because of his huge radiolucency at the apex. There's no bone for us to place it into. Therefore, we don't have enough strength to actually load it right away. And the other option is, well, why don't I just do a fixed partial denture on him and just call it a day? And, if he was an older patient, if he was, up there in age and wasn't mid-30s, a young professional, I might consider that for him. I would say that I really enjoy placing implants, and a well-placed implant in a good site, I think, is a very good conservative option long-term. We don't have to destroy his enamel on number 8, number 10. He may have to have something done to that, of course, one day for aesthetics, but the longer we can prolong anything being done to 8 and 10, I really appreciate that for him, and I'm sure he does too. So one thing we did is, of course, the middle of the night, midnight, and go back to this for a second, we gave him some antibiotics, gave him amoxicillin and metronidazole, which is considered the poor man's hammer. We gave that to him, gave him a couple of weeks, and his pain level went down, his infection resolved, and when he was there, we didn't give him some models because we wanted to pre-plan his case. And what we did is we took the models, and these are invaluable in planning a case with fiber reinforced composite, because what you can do is you can turn them around and you can look at the case and you see where the occlusion's happening. Okay, and as you can see, I'm kind of picturing my fiber to go right where you see it right here. And of course, if you look over here, this little area is going to be hitting where the fiber's hitting. And what I also like to do is I like to take the models and put articulating paper in there. And as you can see, right there on number 8, you can see where there's occlusion. And so what we have to do, these fibers are about 0.3 millimeters thick. I like to reduce the tooth that's going to be bonded to if there's occlusion there by about 1 millimeter, which gives me enough space for the resin plus the fibers to do to have a really nice junction. And you can see here that the other locations where the occlusion is happening is not that big and not important. This is up by the ledge. I have plenty of space below it. This tooth is coming out, and this is also up by the incised ledge, which is perfect. Next thing we do is we measure a piece of paper and about the approximate length that we want our fiber to be. and we cut that fiber and we transfer it to the mouth. And before we do that, you can see we extracted the tooth. I wish I could say that it was completely atraumatic, but there was a little bit of casualty there on the facial and the lingual, probably due to the forceps. But we spent about 15 minutes really cleaning out this site really well, all the way down to almost to the floor of the nose. Really spent time with our round burrs and curettes and just got all the granulation tissue out there, all the infection, and decorticated with a round burr, packed it with allograft mixed with metronidazole, and placed a collar plug in there because those had nice bony walls all around the cervical area of the tooth, and so we didn't need to have any non-resorbable membranes placed in there to aid in walls, bony walls to be grown. So then what we did is we put a rubber dam on them because it was a bloody mess, and what we do is, if you remember the diastema, we decided that we were going to do a little bit of a diastema closure, so I made sure that with my perioprobe that we had approximately 9 millimeters, and we added about 1.5 millimeters to the mesial of number 8. And then came over here and make sure I had about 9 millimeters to work on number 9. And all we do is we take the fiber that we already pre-planned and we adhesively bond it to the back of the teeth. And I kind of pull it out a little bit so that the fiber is kind of midway between the lingual and the facial. I don't really have a good photo of that, but you can kind of tell that I kind of pull it out towards us so that we can incorporate the pontic inside that fiber. Then we just take a glob of composite, really, and put it on there, make sure that it's attached well to the fiber, and we shape it, and shape it until you're happy with it. You got to spend a little bit of attention to make sure you don't bond too much to the surfaces over here. It doesn't matter if you get a little bit, but if you want for ease taken off later, it's easier when you don't have it all completely bonded in there. So when we take it off, this is what we have. I try to approximate as close as I could to where the peaks of the cervical margins would be, and hopefully that we get some healing here. Looks really nice. It's not the best work I've ever done, but patient's really happy with it. And this is the back of the tooth. You can kind of see where the fibers are kind of impregnated in here, and back here underneath the graft, I like to have a little bit of space to where we can access that and be able to evaluate that when he comes in next time. So this is him before and after with his traumatized brown tooth, and when he left with his new diastema closure Dentapreg reinforced composite. Now, it's been a couple months since this has been done. This case is actually not done, and we communicated, of course, through text, and I asked him to send me a picture of how I was doing, because I told him I was doing the presentation, and he sent me this picture right here. And it's holding up really well. He's really happy with it. His fiance loves it, and when he gets back in, if he gets back in soon, we're going to start the process by taking it off, evaluating the site, and we may either do a immediate implant with immediate provisional, or we may put this back on. I think that he's probably leaning towards putting this back on, and at this point I think I am as well. All right, so we'll switch gears a little bit and talk. Most of you guys may be wondering about, is this well studied? Is this a good option? And there's actually some pretty interesting studies out there that I want to share with you here. The first one here is a 10-year clinical evaluation of resin-bonded fixed dental prostheses on non-prepared teeth. Now, what they did is they had 23 patients restored with resin-bonded bridges and evaluated for 10 years. They used natural teeth, acrylic, porcelain teeth, and they were all used for ponics, okay? And what they found was after 10 years, they had 4 ponic debondings that were observed, and they were all rebonded and remained functional until the end of the follow-up. What was really interesting is that all the abutment teeth were caries-free, but they were hypersensitive. But also the periodontal improvement was seen in these cases. And what they concluded was at the end of it was that non-invasive resin-bonded fixed partials were simple, pain-free, less costly treatment procedures that could provide acceptable clinical longevity with high patient satisfaction. Sounds like kind of a marketing scheme, but from what I'm seeing, I totally agree with every statement that made. Another study that I looked up, and this is a 4-year clinical evaluation, and this is kind of a crazy mnemonic here, but it stands for glass fiber reinforced composite-based resin-bonded fixed partial dentures. Wow, that's a long mnemonic, but it says and they're used as periodontal splints to replace lost anterior teeth. And what they did is they took 39 patients with periodontal disease, and they all needed one mandibular tooth added. What they found was that 89.7% survival rate, and they found an improved periodontal status in 78.3% of the patients. And the conclusion was the 4-year clinical evaluation indicated that these resin bonded fixed partial dentures may be useful as fixed prosthesis to replace 1 to 3 lost anterior teeth with damaged periodontal support and adjacent teeth. Now, I've never used one for 3 anterior teeth. I've usually done 1 or 2, and I would totally agree with this conclusion as well. From what I've seen in my practice, that these things last. They're, as long as you consider them to be a long-term provisional option, and you communicate with the patient, I think that these things are quite capable of lasting at least 4 years. Now, one thing that I would like to talk about, because it's kind of a hot topic in dentistry, is this idea of being conservative and always striving for the best conservative dentistry. And you know, one thing I worry about is this what we're doing to our patients? Is this conservative, but is this causing a problem? There's an article in Inside Dentistry that really kind of talked about this. It's a pretty good article if you want to read it. And it says, when the most conservative treatment might not be the most appropriate. And I actually got to tell you a little story. I had a patient come in not too long ago, new patient, who had been a previous patient of the dental school that I attended, and they were in the faculty practice. And I remember this faculty member being really, really big on remineralization. And I was very shocked when we took the x-rays and I looked in her mouth, and I saw a bunch of D3, D2 lesions that were very close to the pulp, you know, almost 4, 5, 6 of these things all over the place. And I asked the patient, I said, what, have you ever been told you had caries before? And they go, oh, yeah. We were watching these things, and I was on ClinPro and remineralization protocol, and she was quite shocked, and I was quite shocked how much damage was done by watching some of these smaller lesions and trying to remineralize, especially since this patient was, of course, lost to the faculty practice. And I'm glad she came in when she did, because we were able to save them without endo. But this article really rung a bell for me that some of these conservative treatments that we're trying to do may not be the most appropriate. Another one they talk about is a cracked tooth. If you got a cracked tooth, you may want to crown that tooth, because if you wait, crack plus procrastination can equal extraction if you wait too long for it. So at that point, the conservative treatment would be a failure. Now, in this instance with these fibers, I really feel like I'm a lot more confident in this now that I've done many of these things, but I didn't always feel that way. And I want to talk a little bit about how I first stumbled onto the fibers, because I'm a pretty skeptical guy. And there's a really good dental meeting that happens in Florida every year. If you ever get a chance to go to the Florida Dental Congress at the Gaylord in Orlando, it's really good. But I remember I was going through the exhibitor booths, and I'm kind of looking at everybody, and I see this very well-designed product. It was fibers, and it was very well priced. And immediately I started to see what I can do with it, especially when the reps started talking to me about the science of it. I started to read about it a little bit. I started to immediately see that these would be great for provisionalization, as we're talking about, but also for staging large cases while grafting and implant seal, which we've already talked about. And also they have products where they have fiber reinforcement of core buildups and posts. And what really got me is when I started thinking about all the fibers that we use in nature. There's fibers in trees, there's fibers in animal life, with the cellulose really strengthening the animals, or with the plants, and the collagen fibers really strengthening all types of tissue. And the denser that the fibers are, the stronger the tissue is. And we've used this technique in other places such as industry. The carbon fiber has got so many applications now. It's almost ubiquitous in a lot of different industries because of how strong it creates for all different industries. And in dentistry, we don't really have a lot of fibers yet. We we have a lot of polymer chemistry. A lot of our acrylics and things like have some polymerization, but true fibers we really haven't used it yet, and I think it's got a really unique place for what we can do. So if you look up some of these pictures here, are going to show you kind of how it works, the science of it. So what they're basically glass that are all aligned in a row, and the resin encapsulates each of these fibers, and it's a really really tight system. If you look at the Dynapreg fibers, the problem with some fibers is that they're not fully coated with resin, and they have a manufacturing process that really makes sure that all of the glass fibers really get incorporated with that resin, so when we do to them, we're getting a very strong connection. You can kind of see that there's no gas between the fiber and the resin on these scanning electron microscopes images, and they really form a tight bond. Kind of see at this point too, they're really tight. You see the fibers going through them. So the applications, and I actually have not ventured into all the applications of what these fibers can do, but really there's three main aspects that they can be helped in. One is stabilization, another one is restoration, another one is for prosthetics. And you can use them for periosplints, post-trauma splints. If somebody gets their tooth knocked, you need to stabilize a little bit. Having that flexible fiber helps out a lot. Post-ortho retainers for the lower linguals. Instead of using the metal wire, you can use these. You can use minimally invasive bridges like what I'm showing, and you can also do an overdenture frame, which I'll show you in a little bit too. And there's a whole new area that I haven't ventured into with crown reinforcement and crown retention. There's a new material out now. I don't know if you guys have heard about it from some other company that I haven't tried yet, but I'm going to. It's essentially like how we make our temporary crowns with a bisacryl. They're making them so hard now that they're kind of a long-term provisional that you can use chairside, and but some of those things, if we reinforce them with fibers, are showing some really good promise long-term as an alternative to an expensive crown for the patient, for patients who can't afford it. So the Dynapreg is a comprehensive system. It's kind of the fibers are arranged in such a way that they use them for different things. Like they have strips, they have pins, they have mesh for different applications. And the two that I really use as far as the strips go are the ones on the left. They're a braided strip. There's a 2 millimeter wide one, which is 0.2 millimeters thick. And the one that I really use a lot is this braided strip, this 3 millimeter wide, 0.3 millimeters thick. And look how many fibers are in here. There's over 10,000 fibers in a 3 millimeter strip. Just phenomenal how much power you're getting with these things. Again, 3 millimeter wide. This is my one that I use a lot. It's 3 millimeter. It comes to 60 millimeters long. You usually get about 2 uses out of each fiber because you can cut them and put them back in the package, so it's nice. These are the posts that we've used. I really like these because they're essentially a fiber reinforced chamber retained core buildup, and you basically flow the material down there. It's got a nice passive fit, and it bonds extremely well to your favorite dual cure resin. So as long as you get the resin down at the tip, you can take these fibers and you kind of jiggle them around there to get it all to settle. And once you like it, you cure it and just cut the fibers off and prepare the tooth for the crown as you normally would. And you don't have to worry about the forces being transmitted down the length of the posts to cause any splitting. And they're just very passive. It's just a very good concept. Here's a case where patient's lower bridge broke off completely, and just we deemed this non-restorable here. This post right here had terrible ferrule. These teeth right here had some caries in them, and this tooth probably could have been saved, but he already had an implant in this site, and he was really looking for a lower implant bridge. He already had lots of implants on the upper, and he wanted to make sure he did the strongest thing, and so he wanted to support this lower with a lower implant bridge. And so what we did in some of these sites, just for provisionalization, these are the teeth that are going to be extracted eventually. What we did is we built up some of these broken off teeth with these fiber reinforced chamber retained composites, and you can kind of see here that how there's really no rules to these things. As long as the fibers are in there, I bent them in half and shoved them back down there, so I just had more fibers in there as much as I can get in there. But you can see how they kind of splinter a little bit if you really bend them in half, and so you kind of see them there. And after you finish and polish it up, what we did is we put a provisional bridge on top of this while the implants healed. And so now the implants are almost healed, and we'll be extracting these teeth and doing an implant bridge from 21 all the way to 28. We've also used the fiber reinforcement for our hybrids, and this is more for denture conversions for patients who want to have more of a fixed solution. Of course, the final restoration is going to be a metal frame, but in the provisional, in the temporary phase, I feel really confident putting in these fibers into the intaglio and then coating with my resin. It just gives me a little extra layer of protection in case something does break. Now, it doesn't completely stop crack propagation, but if you do get a crack propagating, you'll notice it, and it's not going to snap in half and break. Okay, which is a good thing. All right, so let's jump back into some cases, and this is a patient who presented to our office as a new patient, and she was a 16-year-old female. She had a really high aesthetic demand. She came with her mom, and she weren't really happy with their current situation. She was not old enough for implants. We thought she was going to be getting a little bit older, and to be honest with you, I was going to get a little bit nervous. If you've done enough implants in the anterior, you kind of worry a little bit about cases like this turning out well in the end, especially when you place implants and they're as permanent as they are with high aesthetic risks. So she wants a more aesthetic provisional solution until she can decide a little bit older to what she wants to have. This is her current situation. As I told you before, these Essex retainers over time, they do get a little bit dingy, and actually she had this one for quite a while, maybe even as long as a year, and she took immaculate care of it. She took the ponics out, cleaned them, didn't use toothpaste on them, just used hand soap and water, but still over time they do get a little bit dingy, as you can see. And this is a stage of life where a lot of kids are still wearing braces, and so it wasn't too much of a social situation, but she really wanted to improve her aesthetics. So this is her. Another thing that kind of worried me is that her ridges were a little bit thin, and she probably would have benefited from a little bit of grafting. I don't like placing the really small one-piece implants without having some options as far as different abutments, and so just a little bit nervous about this case. I was really happy to provisionalize her and get a little bit older so I can make a decision. So what we did is we decided to do resin bonded bridges on her, and for aesthetics, she was a little too brighter than a B1, and I had a really hard time matching her shade. So sometimes we take these black and white photos and try to get as close to the value as we can, and so we decided on 040. And what we did is we took some models, and I cut my fibers to help out during the delivery of these, and I kind of got on the model, put them right where I wanted to, where the cervical margin was, and we brought it to the mouth. We placed the rubber dam with the little wedgies. We bonded them both in place, and this was her immediately after we placed them. Now, the shade was, of course, maybe a little bit brighter than we'd like, but the patient was very, very, very happy about it. You see on the back sides of these teeth right here where the resin bonded bridges are in there. They're nice and smooth. Patient said they felt smooth to her tongue, had no problems with them, and she was very, very satisfied. From a distance, they even look any better. And up close, you can kind of tell, but from a distance, you can't really tell that much. Now, she was very satisfied with aesthetics. Her mom was very satisfied with aesthetics, and she's a busy kid. Kind of missed a lot of hygiene appointments and things like that. But overall, she decided that maybe in our conversations, that she may choose to do Maryland bridges in the future instead of implants because of how well they come out. She thought, well, maybe implants with all the grafting and everything like that, maybe I can just live with Maryland bridges. And I thought, well, a couple of years down the road, we can talk about doing some more permanent ones on her and get some nice porcelain work in there, so she'd be satisfied. And she's in college now, and for this presentation, I was looking through my photos and I said, I'd really like to see what she's doing. It's been about 3 years since I had seen her, and so I started calling her on the phone, and I called her mom, and I called her, and I called her mom again. I probably called for about a month and a half so I could find out where she was, and finally I've been communicating a lot with my patients through text messages. So I said, let me just try to send a text message to her. So I sent her a text message that says, "Hi, Brooke, this is Dr. Phil Crater from Cape Dental Care. I just want to see how your bonded teeth have been going. Have you noticed any problems with them, discoloration? Any feedback would be great. I'm lecturing on a product that we used, and your feedback is valuable to other dentists who might want to use the product for other patients like you. Thanks for any help that you can offer." And she says, "Hello, my teeth have been holding up okay. I can send you a photo of how they look in terms of color right now." So I gave her my email address, and she sends me back this photo right here. And I was like, yep, those are holding up pretty good. I would say that she's in college, and I think she's actually modeling now, and they're holding up quite well. I was pleased to see the photo. And the key when we spoke to her a long time ago is informing her that the patient, informing the patient that this is a long-term provisionalization. And to be honest with you, I didn't expect for this long for these to be looking this good. And so I was really pleased that she sent me these photos, because it really confirmed that this is a good provisionalization method. And but I do like to tell patients that there's about a 5-year max. But I've seen them last longer. But I like to tell them that to at least have some kind of expectation that they will be replacing these, or we're going to be talking about a more permanent solution about 5 years from now. And the resin bonded bridges, as you can see, can be an excellent option. And she's really happy with them. And the big thing to remember is that these things are really low cost and easy to repair. Basically within, we probably used less than $150 worth of materials on her. And gave her a solution that lasted all this time. It's pretty hard to get that low cost to repair something, and for that long. All right, here's another case of a patient with a congenitally missing lateral incisor. Now, she was a little bit older, but she couldn't afford an implant yet, and she really wants an implant, and one day she really will get one. But she just wanted something to provisionalize her in the meantime. I think she had a flipper before, and she didn't like it. And so we gave her this option. And so what we did is we took the impression, cut the fiber. I think I ended up cutting it a little bit too long here. I think I trimmed it up a little bit after this photo. But then what I did is I made sure to set where I wanted my cervical margin. Sometimes when you put the rubber dam on, and if you don't really pull it up all the way to the cervical margins, it can be a little bit hard to tell exactly where it is. So when you take the rubber dam off, sometimes you're not in the right position. So it's really nice to have something to help you set where you're going with that. And so we put the rubber dam on, and we just basically blob composite on there. And some people do a lot with their shaping. I usually blob it on, and I usually use a handpiece to smooth it all down. Now in her case, I got a little bit overzealous, and I put a little bit too much connection on the facial. Maybe my shade was a little bit gray, but really this is just composite compared to, the dark teeth here. And so it's hard to completely shade match it 100%. But I'll tell you what, she was very happy with it, having a tooth there that was fixed, that was very solid. And, we gave her instructions to be able to clean underneath this. I made sure that I can get a floss thread underneath this so she can clean it. You want to make sure all the edges are nice and smooth and polished so that there's no stain or bacteria that can hide out in places. You don't want to be causing caries by putting these restorations in place. All right. The next case is one where we see sometimes where this person has crossbite, and when we're talking about the implant provisional, we usually throw in an Essex for no charge for our patients. That's kind of my little thing that I try to include. Patients really appreciate having something included at no cost, at least to get them by for a couple months until they get it. So I don't do fibers for every patient. I do a lot of Essex. In this case, the Essex just wasn't an option because the crossbite would have really put a lot of pressure on that one tooth in the front here. Right here as the Essex would just basically kept the mouth open, and the patient couldn't tolerate a flipper. So what we did is we just put a rubber dam on, put some fiber on, and bonded a tooth in place. And the patient was super happy with it. And sometimes I worry about giving patients these things, and them not coming back because they're so happy with the provisional option. And I think I do have one case where someone has a just like this, where a healing abutment is with a Denipreg over top of it. And what I don't have is a picture of the back of this, where I actually leave a very large portion of this. I can actually access the healing abutment. I can't unscrew the healing abutment, but I can at least I can see the healing abutment in its entirety and make sure I can get all the way mostly to the facial. And the patient's instructed to make sure they brush, and there's actually a little space where they can brush here. So this is not completely on top of the healing abutment. There is some space behind it. I wish I had a picture to show you. Another useful tip for using Denipreg: Ponics can debond if they're not properly bonded. So this is just your adhesive dentistry 101. You got to make sure that you properly isolate, that you're properly wetting everything, and properly curing everything. One of the problems with our curing lights is they don't always penetrate all the way, and so you got to either spend more time with them at different angles, and just make sure that you really spend time making sure that everything's well cured. And you may need to remove a little bit of tooth structure if the bite's too tight. We already showed that on the stone models. It's really nice to have those. It's kind of a bad day when you're trying to do it without models, trying to look in the back and see if you have enough, and it's really easy to turn the models around and see them. And you need to make sure you have well-polished surfaces to avoid stain. There's nothing worse than having stain develop, especially if you got them like on a Paradox rinse. If there's any nooks and crannies but they're not cleaned very well, to have that stain is sometimes can be bothersome to the patient. All right, so this is another case where, this is actually a case where it did debond, and this is just a poor bonding on my part, and I don't have many of these, but the good news is they came in, had the tooth, put a little piece of rubber dam up there, and just basically bonded right back on, and we're back in order. So it takes me, less than 3 minutes to put it back on. So not too much sweat off my back there. All right, this is the final case we're going to present tonight. And this is probably where I do most of these types of cases. And so this is a really good example of how we use this in our office. So this 54-year-old presents for an implant consult for non-restorable number 24. And you can see you can see it from this picture. It's kind of blurry, but it's got a brown tooth down there. He was told by another dentist that he needs an implant, and he is getting a second opinion, essentially. And he doesn't want to spend a lot of money, as most people will tell you right off the bat. And as you can see, he's got a brown tooth that's just not very good looking, and it is non-restorable. And if you look at it, yeah, you could put an implant there. I've placed implants in the lower anterior before. They can be difficult. I would say that you want to have the skinniest implant you can. I know that Astra makes a 3.0 two-piece, which is really nice. Straumann makes a 3.3. Some of the other implant brands you can get down, to the one pieces, for like a 2.2 or 2.4, But in this case, if you look from the occlusal, you'll see that there's a lot of overlap here. You don't want to see it from the facial, but this tooth is kind of locked in here. And so, that just doesn't look like a very fun implant to place to me. And so I started talking about the patient with the options, and he was already, thinking that I was going to recommend him, spend a couple $1,000s on an implant, which would have been great. But I also like my work to be really nice, and I just, kind of had a weird feeling that this space may be too narrow, and there may be a better option for him, especially for money considerations. And so what we did is we extracted the tooth, and I removed a little bit of the adjacent teeth to give me a little more space here. And yeah, I could have placed an implant, I could have placed a smaller one, but what we ended up doing for him is we put some rubber dam. We used one of the wedgies to kind of measure, because I did not have stone models on him. I kind of did this on the fly. As the first time he came into the office, I had about an hour time for the consultation, because I had some other things canceled. So right away, I just put a rubber dam on him, took the tooth out, measured the wedges there for how much length I was going to need for my fiber. And the good thing about working on the lower anteriors is that there's you don't have to grind on the teeth in order to get enough space for restorative space. So it is, I put the fiber there, and you kind of see it, how I kind of loop it a little bit forward just to get a little bit of that dimension there. And I used just freehand composite, just blobbed it on there and shaped it, and came out with a pretty nice result there. And you kind of see from the back there where it's bonded on there. And, you can see I did leave some space from the clean underneath it. And I did bond it pretty tightly to these teeth here in this case. And he was really happy and with the final result. Now, I think that case looks pretty good. And, I told him that, I would say that let's reevaluate it in 5 years. I'd be really happy to get 5 years out of it. He's really happy to get 5 years out of it. And I said, if it's still lasting in 5 years, we'll keep it going. Because we saw those studies about the, about the follow-up for these lower anterior cases with the mandible, and they really last a long time. I mean, it's really as long as your bonding will last, essentially. And so this was earlier in the year, and I wanted to get a follow-up for him just to see kind of how he was feeling about it, if this was actually a good option for him. And he wasn't a man of many words, and so I texted him because I couldn't get a hold of him again. And so I said, hey, Ray, this is Dr. Philip Craver from Cape Dental Care. I wanted to check on your lower tooth to see how it's going. Any issues? And he said, all good. And I said, good to hear. Have a great day. All right, so that was our final case. Hope you guys enjoyed the presentation. I would love to take any questions that you guys might have. You can email me if you would like, Dr. Phil at Cape Dental. Love to answer your questions. I'm going to flow through the questions now. One second here. All right, so this is a great question. I'm really glad somebody asked this one. It says, in the case of the attorney, you spoke of removing the temp, evaluating the site, and maybe replacing it. How do you remove it intact? That's a great question, because probably the one downside of this treatment is that you do have to remove it, and if you need to replace it, you kind of have to start from scratch, because removing these things is pretty simple. It's like if you ever removed ortho bands, or if you remove the ortholingual wire. You basically use your air water with your handpiece, with like a football diamond, and you remove the majority of it. And then after you do that, you turn your water off and you kind of see the material. And you don't have to get it all off. You just got to get enough to where the patient feels like it's smooth, and over time it'll discolor, and you'll see it sometime on the back, and you'll be able to remove it. And just tell the patient that I'm maybe leaving a little bit on to smooth to you. We may have to remove some later, but I don't want to remove an extra tooth structure. And so that's how we do it intact. And if we have to put it back on, you have to go through the whole process again. But as you see, it's not that difficult. Okay. All right, got another question. How often do you find decay develop when hygiene is difficult to maintain those nooks and crannies? I have never found a cavity in between these things. I would imagine that it is absolutely possible. I always make sure that I really tell the patients, that I really harp on them about the oral hygiene around these things, because I don't want to see caries around them. I tell them all it's really important that these things are well maintained and cleaned, and they come in for their follow-ups, because if you get a cavity underneath these things, you're gonna lose a tooth, because they are kind of hard to see. X-rays around these things, because of the bonding, you kind of get this big, broad radial opacity that you can't really tell, what's growing underneath there. But that's also when you place them, you want to make sure that you place them in a way that you can't access them. So, like, especially on the linguals and around different areas, you want to make sure that you have visualization of them, especially with your instrumentation. Okay. Next question. Okay, what kind of material do you use to rebuild the missing tooth? A natural tooth, a partial prosthesis tooth? So really the benefit of these fibers is that you can really use anything. I don't tend to, I have before, where if you take the patient tooth out, you can grind off the root, you can grind a little channel in the back of the tooth and then bond that to it. It actually looks pretty good. I didn't have any cases to show you today, but I've done it several times and it works just fine, just like composite. What I normally find is that the tooth that was there to begin with was not the most aesthetic tooth, and I feel like with my composite technique, I can usually do a little bit more to make sure that the aesthetics is a little bit better than it was beforehand. So, but then you can use a denture tooth. Walk into the lab, grab a denture tooth, find a one that fits, and cut it, and then just bond it on. I'll say another question is, can you work these Dentapreg strips on a model and not affect the bonding qualities? you probably saw my fingers, using the oils for my fingers, and I'm touching these surfaces. I try to use gloves. Sometimes I don't. But whenever you go to bond these things, I do re-wet them with bonding agent, and they're essentially just like a composite tooth. That's got, if you're going to add to a tooth in the mouth, you do have to kind of resurface it a little bit and add new bonding agent and go through the whole process to bond it. So because I'm going through all the steps, I don't really worry about me ruining the quality of the bond. Especially, I'm also encompassing I try to coat the entire fiber with resin so that when I'm adjusting it, I'm not getting into the fibers. That's another good thing I'll talk about, is that when you want to have enough resin on top of the fiber so that when you're polishing it away, you're not getting into the fibers. I've done it a couple times where I didn't remove quite enough tooth structure, or if I didn't fully evaluate it. You get to this point where now you have fibers kind of going all over the place, and you really have two options at that point. Usually it's a provisional. This isn't going to be long term. So you just got to get it smooth enough to where the patient's happy with it. It's still going to be strong. If it bothers them, which I've never noticed that, or no patient never said that they felt fibers on the back of their teeth at all. If there would, I'd have to take it off and put another one on there. Okay, what price do you charge for a 1-unit bridge with fibers? Now, that's a great question. I kind of, we're a fee-for-service practice. We don't have insurance considerations. I mean, we have an insurance coordinator, but we don't let it dictate what we do. And there are codes in there for ponics and resin bonded things, but it's typically half the cost of a crown. The materials that we use, I believe, they're way less than what we do for our crowns. So what we do is we just basically charge for half a crown for what we would do. If it's a really tough case, and sometimes I slide my scale up, I don't have a set fee really, but it's around half of a crown. And it's really based on my time. If I know it's going to take a lot of time, I up the fee. If not, then I do that. Okay. Any other questions? I already answered that question. Good. Well, let's say, what kind of composite do you use? Flowable, compactable, or bulk film? I use a lot of flowable at first. My first layer, when I do on the back of the teeth, I put the flowable resin down because I know that when I put my fiber up against it, it's really going to disperse the composite very far, and it's going to be real thin, so I can actually place it on there without having to really push on it real hard. These things, after you do them a couple times, you get better at it. The first couple times, it's really hard to kind of set it in place, and you put it on the model. That's why it's really nice to have the model in front of you. You kind of line it up with your fingers. You kind of get your fingers oriented on the model where you want it, and when you transfer it over, you kind of put your fingers the same way on the teeth, and you kind of have it settled in the same way. And I usually take like a cotton forceps where I have the two prongs, and I set them on the back of the two teeth, and I have my assistant cure it. And then after I get the first layer down, I'll usually flow composite or flowable over top of them. I use a kind of a thicker flowable that it's got like a high filler content, so it's kind of like a flowable regular composite, so that really helps that a lot. And then another person asked, is rubber dam a must? I would say that rubber dam is very helpful. I don't like rubber dams at all, but I've learned the hard way that these cases where you're going in and out of the mouth a lot, you got to have them perfectly positioned, that tongue's flopping around and everything. I mean, it's really nice, and I think the patients appreciate it too. The only time we ever use rubber dam in our office is with a endo and with these fibers. What is my finishing and polishing technique? I use a lot of what are they called? The discs, the soft flex discs. I really like taking a soft flex disc. In dental school, I had a professor who every time I did a composite said, "Your composite stinks. Watch this," and he would take a soft flex disc out and just shine the thing like crazy. And I always think about that. So it's a really nice way of using the soft flex discs. And someone asked, do I need to etch the fiber strip? You do not need to etch the fiber strip. The reason why you etch anything, enamel, is to open up the the enamel rods and get the tooth surface, you don't need to etch the fiber strip. I do coat it in an extra layer of bond though before I put it on, just to help it wet it again. Okay. All right. I think that's pretty much it. Hope you enjoy this presentation. Love to hear questions if you have them. Hopefully this has been beneficial to you, and hopefully your patients, their lives are improved by using some fibers. Have a great night.